Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
R.J. Joseph.
And Patrick R. McDonough.
Hi there. How are you guys doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having us, Molly.
Thank you so much for coming on. I am so excited to talk to you both. Can you tell me a little bit about yourselves and about the anthology we're here to talk about today?
Rhonda, you go, girl.
Okay, yeah. So I'm R.J. Joseph. I am an academic and creative writer. I write mostly about and within horror, the genre, also romance at different times. And I write a lot about the race, the intersections of race and gender within those genres and in popular culture.
For me, I'm from New England, so I typically wrote a lot from that region, but I moved to South Jersey in 2015. So ever since then, I'm kind of found myself exploring more areas. And what I typically write is horror, crime, or some sci-fi, some fantasy. Um, do you want to know anything else? Because Rhonda's answer is probably a lot better. Just want to know if there's anything specific I can cover.
Both answers were fantastic. That is so cool. And okay, so we're here to talk about this anthology that is a horror western. Can you share some more about that? How that came to be?
Yeah, so I was submitted to a press that was around, no longer is. It's Silver Shamrock Publishing, and they had a annual series of anthologies, Midnight, and then it would be different words like Midnight Beyond the Stars. This one was Midnight in the Stagecoach. It was a splatterpunk Western anthology. So I wrote something. I don't know if it was splatterpunk. Um, it's not really gory. It's just airy and creepy. And they, like I said, they closed. I sent it to one of my friends. After I emailed him, well, yeah, I hit him up. I messaged him. I asked him if his press, Death's Head Press, is going to, now that there's no Western, they're known for their horror Westerns. I'm like, it made sense to me that they would put out an anthology. So I asked, and his name is Patrick as well. He said, we aren't, but I'll take a look at your story. He liked it. He said, if the anthology were to happen, this would make the cut. Then I kind of like bribed him. I'm like, well, I'm friends with Edward Lee, so I think I could get his story from the other anthology in this one. And you guys already know Joe Lansdale. And he thought it over, and it eventually happened. And he eventually dropped out of the company to pursue his writing career, which is going, it looks like it's going phenomenal. And then the other person, Jared, dropped out too. So there was a transition. And then by that point, like right before Jared dropped out, I was like, so who's editing this thing now? Because like at some point I skipped this part. I actually asked if I could edit it, and eventually they were like, yeah, that's fine. And for some reason, when Pat and Jared left, I became like fully controlled. Like it was my book, and there was a new team that took over at Desperados Press, and they were cool with like everything. I could write an afterword. They let me write it how I wanted. They let me choose the order. It was a weird experience because I didn't know what was going on for a while. I was left in the dark. I didn't know that there was even a change. And this is my first anthology. And oh yeah, part of the deal of me being an editor was I wouldn't ask for any money um, as an editor, but I would for a writer. And it was a very strange way to dip my feet. Like I feel like I thought I was going in the shallow end, but then I got pushed in the deep end and I started to sink. But eventually I got great friends like Rhonda. Eventually I reached out to her after the order of the story was set out. I had all 16, I think, stories, and asked Rhonda if she could forward it because like I said, I got full control for some reason. And she said yes, and the cover turned out great. So the whole thing was a weird experience. But that's how my story got in. It got edited by that Patrick, the other Patrick, and I got to edit with everyone else. So I don't know. It was a really, really weird way to become a editor. And now I'm obsessed with the idea of being an anthologist. So I'm working on a couple more now.
That's fascinating. I was actually my one of my follow-up questions was going to be, do you want to go back at it again?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna be doing one. It's not gonna be announced for I think a few more weeks, but it's with two of my friends. One's really well known in the writing world. And he may or may not, but definitely is in the same area as Rhonda. So I guess it's not clear unless you know where Rhonda lives. And it's just like the people that are in the anthology. It's a bunch of writers that I have loved for a long time, and it's gonna be one to keep your eyes open for. That's all I can say right now. I can't even drop the title, but off here we could talk if you wanted.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So, Rhonda, we touched a little bit on your involvement, but can you
Mhm.
share some more about how you got involved in this?
Oh yeah. Uh, Pat is awesome. And so I would never say no to anything that he asked me to do. So he comes to me and he says, "Hey, I have this Western horror, Western anthology, and would you please do the forward?" And I'm thinking, oh, that's going to be exciting. It was the very first time I'd ever been asked to do a forward. And I thought, oh my gosh, I get to do all these wonderful things, like all this kind of literary analysis. And I get to talk about theme, I get to talk about big picture items. But most importantly, I get to read this book before anybody else. So I was really excited about that. I was really excited that he invited me. And so, of course, I was going to do it. And so there we go. I was really excited about it.
That's awesome. Oh my gosh, yes. The getting to read it before anyone else is always the most
Yes.
fun part. Can you actually speak a little bit on the blending of Western and horror stories together? Because it's not necessarily a genre you would associate together, but it makes so much sense.
Ron, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm a native Texan. And so, as if that's not apparent by my Southern drawl, but one of the things that excites me about mixing horror with Westerns is that just here where I live outside of Houston, there are so many things that are weird here, even here in our current times, right? So, like we have storms that sound like monsters; they literally sound like monsters howling. There's a lot about the land, the spirits in the land, the energies in the bodies of water. And so it to me, it seems a very natural segue for talking about life here, not just in the past, but also in the present. And so that is one thing that I think is really cool about the blending of these two genres. It just gives us a vehicle for exploring that innate weirdness that happens out west here.
That
Yeah.
is so cool.
That's a really good way to put it. So for me, westerns are just about they're about a certain region, but there's one in particular that's discussed and viewed in a lot of ways that we've always seen, like in television or like the Rifleman. It's this, it's a cowboy. That was a hugely popular show in the I think 60s.
Mhm.
Um, and movies, I don't know about y'all, but when I think of westerns, I think of two dudes, and not women. Not to knock them, but I wish I did. And that's John, John Wayne, and Clint Eastwood. Um, I didn't want to do that. So I know of other westerns, and they include like Montana in the wintertime and not like gunfights. So that stuff super interests me. So there's a lot more to westerns. Like some people might say I'm not a fan of westerns, but when you break from the norm, there's a lot of interesting stories. Victor Laval just released Lone Women. That's a western. Um, and it's absolutely worth checking out. And then you got the horror aspect, which is just you can just tell a western story, and if it's gritty, you can probably say it's like it's in the spectrum of horror. Um, it's a lot of fun. And it's kind of like when people say I don't like horror, they're probably thinking of like a specific kind, like a gory kind. But my wife doesn't like horror, but she loves true crime.
Mhm.
So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I was recently up in South Dakota. I'm from Chicago, but I was up in South Dakota and being there in the mountains and everything and seeing like dead wood and stuff. It makes you realize, yeah, I can totally see how horror could kind of blend with this when
Mhm.
there's just woods and it's isolating, and for a lot of it there's nothing around,
Mhm.
but then there's cowboys and stuff. Like I can definitely see how that would how there like that there would be a crossroads there.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Like Ronald
So,
Kelly's,
oh,
I was just gonna
what were
say
you gonna
Ronald
say?
Kelly's story was kind of like that, just cowboys around,
Mhm.
but there's stuff out there.
Mm, yes. So this is more a question just about your individual writing. When did you start? Were you kids? Were you older? At what stage in your life did you start writing, and how? Whoever wants to take this first.
So I'm totally a stereotype. I literally started writing as a kid, the 6, 7 years old, and I just couldn't quit it, and so here we are. I've always been better with words than I've been with like writing them than I was when I was younger. I wasn't as verbose, and so I used to write a lot of my communication down. I used to write a lot of stuff down that I wanted to say, or different little stories. I've always been full of stories in my head. And so when I was a teenager, there were these magazines, these romance magazines. They used to call them confession mags, and unfortunately, they don't exist anymore, not in the form that they used to. But my very first professional sale was at 17 to one of those magazines, and all I could think was, "Oh my gosh, this is wonderful." So then I went on to sell them a couple more stories, and then soon started being published in horror. So I've been publishing for, I'm not going to say exactly how many years, but I'm going to say that it's been for over 30. And so,
That's
yeah, I'm
amazing.
in it. I played the long game. So I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere.
That is so incredible. What about you?
I did not know that. I'm friends with her, and I didn't know she started at 17. That's incredible. I love the title of that magazine, Confession Mag. Um, how old are kids when they're in the second grade? Like 6 or 7?
Yeah, somewhere
About
in there.
thereabouts. Mhm.
That's the earliest memory I have of myself in class, just reading books about animals, and like I was copying the same words down, but I put it together in my own book and had my own terrible illustrations to match the words. Um, so I guess at that age, but ever since I met my wife, actually, I'll backtrack. In high school, I only read like 3 books, and that was because they were, you had to read them. I'm
Mhm.
glad I read. It was all Quiet on the Western Front, Animal Farm, and The Great Gatsby. Those are all really crazy books. They're all cool though. I like them. And I just thought I was too dumb, but turned out like we were talking about before we recorded, like I got severe ADHD, so it I felt like I was too dumb to read, but really I was just thinking um I think differently than a lot of other kids. So we didn't really know that though back in 2003. It's still kind of not a thing to explore a whole lot like it is now. But anyways, I met my wife years later. She got me back into reading. I fell in love with it. And then I started writing, and I'm like, I should start writing novels. And I wrote a few, all unpublished, probably forever. And I just in 2019, I took over a review site, Deadhead Reviews. Um, I made a podcast a year later. Brennan joined. He's my co-host, and then it just opened a lot of doors, and I wrote more. So yeah, I've had a few. I've had only short stories published, but I'm on my 10th year now.
Oh,
And
wow.
I feel like I'm starting to feel some movement. It feels like I took a big leap over the last
Mhm.
pretty much when the podcast started. I don't think that's a coincidence.
And I mean, publishing an anthology and everything, that's a huge deal, and that's like really taking that big step. You know, hearing about the unpublished novels always gets me excited to talk about things that didn't make the cut. Would either of you like to share some plot lines or characters or things that almost got in but didn't quite make it?
Oh, Rhonda, I want to hear yours.
Well, uh, we're not going to talk about all the unfinished things that I have because they are. Here's the thing, if you can't even talk about it, if you can't even describe the storyline, then that means that it's just a no-go, right? So I had this idea once that I was going to write this sweeping, when I went for my MFA, I was going to write this wonderful historical romance novel, right? I was going to write like Beverly Jenkins, but not like Queen Bev, right? And so I kind of started this thing and it's just sprawling and it's all, and then finally one day I just look at it and I go, this sucks. It's really not good. It kept devolving into these dark corners and places. And I thought, that's just not going to happen. So that's one of those things that has literally stayed on the in the bottom drawer, and it will never see the light of day. In fact, I will put in my will, kids, don't even look at that, just burn it, put salt on it. Yeah, that thing is never coming out. It was horrible. It was so
Oh,
horrible.
I think you know what? Every writer has that kind of story where it's like no one is allowed to look at this or
Uh-huh.
bring it up or anything.
Yes, yes.
But you know what? I'm sure that it taught you things to get you to where you are today. And
Well,
that's the
it
important part of
totally.
writing stories like that.
Yeah, totally. It taught me that that's not where I'm supposed to be. Like, just,
Mhm.
I can do historical horror. My historical horror has a whole different voice from my historical romance. So I was like, so all right, I just give up that dream and it's fine. We're still going to do historical. So it taught me that wasn't my lane.
I am on the lookout for your historical romance accidental horror novel that will be coming out though. I cannot wait.
So that perfectly describes the horror Western novella that I'm working on.
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
Gimme,
It
gimme,
totally
gimme.
does. Yeah, yeah. I'm much better at that with just the romantic element. So that's a perfect descriptor, Molly. I'm going to use that. And I'll be sure
Yeah.
to cite you also.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Much appreciated. What about you? I would love to hear about some of these unpublished novels or
Um,
yet to be published. I don't
well,
know.
yeah, I was gonna say I take it back because I remember every single look, I got a terrible memory of most things, but like with my stories or other stories, I remember every single novel I wrote. And I even remember the sci-fi one, which was my second novel or third I ever wrote. I even remember how it didn't end at like 80 to 85,000 words. So I might get back to them because they put a lot into it to those. They're full-length novels, the longest being 125,000.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I haven't given up on them. But there's this one short story I got. I don't remember what the plot was. It wasn't very good. I just had this one weird image. I don't remember really of what. And my wife read it, and this is when we started dating. And she's like, "Can't get past the first page. You mix tenses is terrible." That's
Mhm.
how I was. I had a lot to learn. It took 10 years for me, maybe seven, but it definitely took a decade to get to a point where I'm like, yeah, I put like it calls in this anthology. I'm proud as hell of it. I don't know if I can say that word. I'm
You
sorry.
should be. You
Oh, you
should
can
Um,
you can say that.
I'm very proud of it. I had friends help me make it better, and it was my idea. And I'm proud of it because it took so long to write it. But if you want to hear about one idea that will eventually come out, I'll tell you that. If not, let's move on to Rhonda.
Well, I don't that sounds pretty exciting. And then I would love to talk some more about the anthology and focus some more on your
Sure.
short stories and that. But first, let's hear about this new idea that's coming out.
So there is one, and it's a mixture of my first ex and me dating, and eventually we got her into this home for uh domestically abused kids from I don't know 18 to 23. She ended up lying about it, which was crazy. Like I thought I was losing my mind. Uh like I was losing my hair at one point and kind of puking blood at one point because she was putting me through a lot of psychological shit. She was my
Oh,
first
wow.
girlfriend. I was 18, so like I'm a late bloomer, but a lot of it took place in Boston and other parts of Massachusetts. So I wrote that in here, except it's like a Clive Barker book. It explores the first American subway system, which was in Boston. I think the late 1800s might be early 1900s, but it's got a lot of it's got two timelines because the other one is based on my little brother who's 4 years younger. He almost died, and he got lifted to he had a tree cutting job he ended up bouncing his head off the asphalt because something clonked him on the head, and
Oh,
he was
wow.
bleeding out. His boss saved his life. Helicopter brought him to Boston Medical, and I drove up from Jersey the next day. I thought he might have been dead. I didn't know. Literally, we didn't know if by the time we got there he'd be dead. So he's fine now. He's back to his
Good.
teaching job. He's seriously good. Doesn't make sense. Doctors don't know how he's alive, but uh, it's based on those two things. And one more thing, after reading Daniel Krause's Whale Fall,
I love
I
Daniel Kraut.
yeah, I sent him an email after because we talked to him, and then I sent him an email about Whale Fall, and I'm like, seriously, dude, thank you for showing me how I should like an example of how I should format my present day and past and how they can blend beautifully. I'm not saying I could write as good as him. I'm just saying like thanks for showing me the way. And he was so sweet. He ended up like being super nice and being he's very grateful, good guy.
Hmm.
But it just goes to show you that like you can write a bunch of novels and it's okay if they sit. Um you might pick them apart, but you might not.
Absolutely. I actually plug for this show, if anybody wants to go listen back, I have two different episodes that I've recorded with Daniel before, and he
Nice.
is a wonderful guy. And
He
if you like
is.
cool horror talks, go on and listen to those because we get all into that.
He's
Um,
very, very nice, and his books are just so different.
oh my gosh, yeah, and I love his writing style so much. Actually, so with you sharing that, I think that raises something interesting is about like the amount of personal that can be put into horror. Do you guys want to talk about that a little bit? Because it's not always something that people would think of as a personal genre when it's got monsters and ghosts and things like that, but it oftentimes is very intimate.
I'll talk about it real quick if you don't mind. Mine's always about someone dying in a family that's close to you. I've lost too many people that are close to me. One was a 13-year-old kid when I was like, I think I was 18 at the time. He's like a cousin to me, killed himself. I just, you know, each death from a loved one pulls a piece of you out forever. And right now I focus on kids dying, and it's graphic at times. It's just violence of what the world does to kids, not anything like sexual. That stuff is not cool with me. I don't touch that. But like a car hitting a kid, it's one of my worst nightmares. So I write about it. I basically write Pixar stories, but for adults. It's all
Yeah,
my
I
worst fears. All sorry, go ahead, Rhonda.
no, it's these things are very personal. I am afraid of a lot of stuff, and having had lots of life experiences, those things just pop up, and there are themes that when I was putting together my first collection that came out last year, it wasn't until I saw all these stories together that I felt like, oh my gosh, all my trauma and all my fears are just laying out right here in front of my face. And it was weird because I thought, oh my gosh, that's a lot. Like one of the best things, but also one of the funniest things that a reader ever said about that collection was, oh my God, who hurt her? Right? Like, and I'm going, well, let's let's just see. We have a list, and like, and some of this stuff is it's not something that necessarily happened the way that I put it on the page, but it's the way that it happened in my head, or it might be
Or
the
the
way
way that
that
it
I thought
felt.
that it could have happened, how it felt. So yeah, horror is very personal to me, and every single story that I write has something in it. How Pat is talking about this overarching theme of loss, loss of people that are close to you that pops up in his work. One of the themes that pops up in mine a lot is loss of self. I think that is probably
Mm.
my biggest fear is that there's so many different components to my identity that I feel like that if I'm lost, that's just the most terrifying thing I could think of. So horror is a very good vehicle for exploring those things. I think that's why we horror writers are actually a lot nicer and more jovial than people expect, because I think they expect us to be kind of all gloom and doom and we're all
Yes.
happy soccer moms and dads and stuff, and that it's like, no, we're happy because we get our therapy through our writing. So
And
we
you're
just write it out.
exercising all of that out of you so
Yes,
you can be that joyful
exactly.
self in your daily life. So actually, yeah, Ron, I have a question for you. What was it like doing a foreword for a book? Like how did that process look?
It was, I was very honored that Pat asked, like, because I know how business goes. So it's not like he asked me because we're buddies. He asked me because at that point he thought that I could do a good job. And so it's always, I feel really good about that when my colleagues think, oh, this is who could do a really good job at this. And so what I did was I read the stories first, all the way through. It was very helpful that Pat was really transparent about how he chose the order, because it was easy for me to translate it in the message that he sent, because anthologies are put together with the eye of the editor, and so sometimes they can sink or fail depending on what that eye is trying to show or what it's trying to do. And so what I really appreciated was how the format was, it made sense. It was a logical format. And it was something that as I got ready to do the forward, I was thinking more like a sort of a literary analysis, like focusing on these bigger ideas, these big themes. And all of these stories had those things, had those components. And so at that point, it was pretty easy to group them by the bigger themes that they sort of represented. And so it was really cool to be able to do that. I was happy to put on my professor hat and put on my academic writer hat. That made it a lot easier than if I couldn't have approached it as a creative writer at all, because there was so much depth to these stories. Like there was no way that I could just shallowly go over them. And, some forewords are actually short stories in themselves. And I thought, that's not going to do for these. It's like, no, these deserve an analysis. These deserve this type of a lens to be put on them. So that was really cool.
I love that. And that's always the kind of forward that gets me the most excited to read a book. When you're looking through it and they're really like diving in, so you can look for those things and like
Mhm.
themes that you can expect and kind of have that in your head going into it. So, Pat, specifically for you, what was it like choosing the stories for this? Did you start with authors or did you find short stories and then go into it?
So Joe Lansdale, Edward Lee were already in it. Uh and then the publisher said, we also have a story from Jeff Strand if you want it. I was like, yeah, obviously. I didn't even read it
Jeff's
yet. I was like,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, of course I do. It's original fiction. Yep. Um, and then I kind of just like I had a list. I forget how long it was. I forget who was on it, like in total. But there were some that I would approach that I writers I love, but they were busy. No worries. And then I asked, I know, I think Brianna Morgan was one of the first, and she was down, and I'm pretty sure she's like, I've never written a Western before though. I'm like, I don't care. You're a good writer. I like that. I like seeing writers that you wouldn't expect in something. Just like
Mhm.
I like seeing actors, comedians, for example, in serious roles. I like to see someone's I like to see their spectrum of acting, in this case in writing. And she crushed it. And then I remember asking Jill, and I remember where I was when I asked Rhonda, and then Brendan's I don't care how this sounds. Brendan's one of my best friends, but he's a great writer.
He is.
So
He
I'll
really
always
is.
I'll always not sound biased with that one. And a few weeks earlier, I had just said, like, on a Facebook comment, how he deserved to be in a higher quality anthology. Um, I don't know how else to say that, because there's some that just seem like they were rushed. I don't have any specific in mind, but they're out there. This one, the publisher, I already knew was great. Joe and Lee they're legends in their field, so I was like, I got a lot of faith in this working out.
That is so cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, no problem.
Actually, that is all of the questions I have for you today. I want to say, what do you have coming up?
Well, I have a nice, heartwarming family holiday story. Not really. In
Your
a
quotes are
holiday
getting me
horror.
deeply concerned. I'm very
Yes,
excited to read it now.
right, exactly. It's a holiday anthology that's coming out from the Seventh Terrace called Solstice in Purgatory. It's supposed to be out next month, and then somewhere around January or March, I also have an eco horror story in a an anthology called Reclamation that's coming out from Outland Press.
That is awesome. What about you?
Um, I got two short stories that I'm not sure if they're gonna be in the anthologies or not. And then I got that anthology I'm editing with my friends. Um, and I'm also working on a few like co-partnered stories, books. They're full-length books. So one's a young adult sci-fi fantasy, and that's been pretty fun. It's like half written, which is 45,000 words, so it's gonna be decent size. And
That's awesome.
the other one's it's like futuristic. It's kind of like if Black Mirror and the Matrix met each other. I don't want to say any more besides that. It's a noir set in like a Matrix world, and those two ideas put together, if they're done right, are really fun.
Hmm. That sounds so cool. Well, thank you guys for coming on today and for plugging your things and talking about this anthology and just all of your writing. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
I'm Patrick R. McDonough.
And I'm R.J. Joseph.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after.
The end.
And
thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.